Okay, let's unpack this. So you have to imagine the 1920s. It's the jazz age. You've got flappers, speakeasies, cars are everywhere, all this brand new technology.
Total chaos.
Right. And in the middle of all that chaos, there's this one spiritual leader who figures out how to use the entire modern toolkit, I mean, radio, stagecraft, celebrity, to preach a message that was, well, ancient by comparison. We're talking about Aimee Semple McPherson, Sister Aimee.
She was absolutely the spiritual superstar of her era. I mean, the
Yeah.
sources are really clear on this. She was the most publicized Protestant evangelist of her time. She just blew past predecessors like Billy Sunday.
Yeah.
It's like she wasn't just trying to survive the modern age. She was basically defining what a mass spiritual movement looked like in the age of media.
And that's what made her so unique, right? This ability to be a master bridge builder. She was using the steel and glass of 20th century tech to build a path for this deeply traditional fundamentalist faith. So today, we are taking a deep dive into the 4 core pillars of her Foursquare gospel. We're going to look at how she pioneered this radio empire she called the Cathedral of the Air. We'll dissect the just phenomenal draw of her faith healing ministry. And then,
Then we get to the scandal.
oh yeah, we're getting into the dramatic, high-stakes media circus around her infamous 1926 desert disappearance.
But to really understand the spectacle, you have to get the substance first. The theological foundation, she laid this all out in 1922 and called it the Foursquare Gospel. This was the unchanging core of her entire movement.
And it was simple.
Simple, memorable, and actionable. It represented the fourfold ministry of Jesus Christ.
And you have to remember, this is a time when all these denominational lines are blurring, theology's getting super complex, so she just distills Christianity down to these 4 easy points. The first was Jesus as Savior.
Right. Salvation's a free gift. You get it through divine grace. Simple as that.
The second point.
Second, Jesus as the baptizer with the Holy Spirit. Now, this was key. She taught that this power, which, endues believers, was primarily shown by speaking in other tongues. That put her right in the middle of the burgeoning Pentecostal movement.
And third, and this was central to her huge early success, was Jesus as healer.
Absolutely. She saw divine healing not as like a rare miracle, but as a sacred sacrament of the church. It was available to everyone right then and there through the prayer of faith.
Okay, and the last point.
The final point was Jesus as the coming king. The idea that the second coming of Christ was personal, it was imminent, and so believers had to be in this constant state of spiritual readiness.
It's the packaging of that message, though, that was so revolutionary. I mean, she's promoting a totally literal interpretation of the Bible, siding with fundamentalists who want to eradicate modernism and secularism. But her presentation was pure modernism.
That's the genius of it. That's the divine diva.
But wasn't that, hypocritical to the very people she was trying to appeal to? How does she justify using Hollywood methods to fight Hollywood culture?
She saw media as a neutral tool. She understood that the real battle for the public square was being fought on the stage, not just in the pulpit. So she took that fundamentalist theology and just fused it with professional stagecraft, with pioneering celebrity culture. I mean, she used theatrical lighting, elaborate sets. She even produced these innovative staged religious dramas every single week.
She didn't just speak, she performed. I read she'd sometimes ride a motorcycle down the aisle or, bring live animals on stage for dramatic effect.
Oh, absolutely.
She basically redefined the worship experience. It went from the somber lecture to a dazzling, immersive show that, frankly, the American mainstream could get behind.
And the headquarters for all this, that was Angelus Temple.
Angelus Temple, yeah. This landmark rising over Echo Park in L.A. It wasn't just a church. It was an architectural statement about media power. You had these huge antenna towers right on the roof, just broadcasting to the world. And that glass-enclosed radio room.
Exactly, right on the top floor so everyone walking by could see the technology at work. It was transparent.
It really was the Cathedral of the Air. The details and the sources about her radio station, KFSG, are just remarkable. It was initially funded by, $25,000 in voluntary contributions?
And the ongoing costs were covered by patrons who paid to sponsor the broadcast for a single day. And that sponsorship list was booked like months and months ahead.
That level of community commitment just speaks volumes about her reach.
That sustained support was so important because the temple, even though it was huge, was constantly packed beyond capacity. The radio was how she scaled that spiritual intimacy. It let her reach thousands who couldn't be there because of distance or illness or just No more seats.
And the programming was massive. This wasn't just the Sunday service replay. They had the Sunshine Hour service, regular church programs, midday shows for shut-ins, Vesper organ recitals.
And even midnight music programs, right?
Yeah.
Aimed at missionaries in different time zones.
Yeah. But the most innovative part, and this is where you see her at just complete mastery of remote engagement, was how she brought new church members in by radio.
Oh, tell us about that, because this feels like it's decades ahead of its time. It's almost like a precursor to real-time interactive media.
It absolutely was. You'd have these congregations maybe miles away, all tuned in, and they'd hear the questions broadcast from the temple, like, do you pledge to live clean Christian lives for God?
Okay.
And then they'd all shout their "we do" response, which was sent back to the temple through private telephone lines. That recorded response was then amplified and broadcast back out to everyone listening.
Wow. So thousands of people, all separated by geography, felt like they were physically present and united in that one moment.
It's incredible. It's not just broadcasting. It's creating a closed-loop communal experience. It's participatory media at its earliest, and it solidified that community way beyond the physical building.
So we've covered the theology and the technology, but now we have to talk about the spiritual phenomenon that really fueled her fame, the faith healing. This was so central to her early success, and it drew tens of thousands of people who were desperate for a cure.
And the stories were just so compelling. They went right to the heart of her Jesus as healer pillar. I mean, you think about those details from the sources, like the 1916 healing in Corona, New York, a young woman with severe rheumatoid arthritis.
Who reportedly left the church that night without crutches. Those are the kinds of stories that just travel like wildfire.
And we even have accounts from people who were there. The sources mention the actor Anthony Quinn, who actually played in the church band for a while.
No way.
Yeah. He remembered her asking the congregation, "Is there anyone here who wants to be cured tonight?" And then describing these instantaneous claims. A man regaining his sight, a woman throwing away her crutch.
The spectacle was just immense. But the claims, they were incredibly difficult to verify. There's a reporter for the Washington Times in 1920 who found the healings were happening so fast he couldn't even record them, let alone verify them.
But when she faced criticism, her organization's response was really methodical.
Right, because this wasn't just all charismatic spectacle. When a couple of clergymen preached against her divine healing in 1928, her staff just went into overdrive. They compiled thousands of documents. Photos, x-rays, medical certificates, detailed testimonies, all to silence the accusations. It shows an organization ready to defend its ministry with data.
And that organizational rigor went way beyond the stage. I think this is a critical point that counters the idea that she was only a showman.
She created a robust, structured, charitable organization.
Exactly. The humanitarian work was real. It was focused on practical needs. She started the Brotherhood, which was all about finding jobs for men just released from prison, helping them get back on their feet.
And the Sisterhood.
Right. The Sisterhood was sewing baby clothes and providing aid for impoverished mothers.
And on top of that, she was engaged on policy. She publicly supported organized labor, arguing that workers' wages should be fair. She was ministering to the soul and the body, spiritual comfort and tangible social aid. That dual focus just made her impact enormous.
But that success, that visibility, that power, it made her a lightning rod. And that's where this narrative just explodes into the mother of all scandals. We've established she's arguably the most famous woman in America.
Hands down.
And then on May 18th, 1926, she just vanishes from Ocean Park Beach.
And at first, everyone assumes it's a tragedy. Search parties are out there. The thinking is she must have drowned. The whole country is watching. Then, 5 weeks later, the story just takes this sharp turn into pure drama. On June 23rd, she reappears in Agua Prieta, Mexico.
Her story was, it's a genuine desert mirage narrative. She claims she was lured away by a couple asking for prayer, forced into a car, knocked out by a chloroform-laced cloth, and then held for weeks in a desert shack.
And then she escapes.
Right. She claims she escaped through a window and trekked 17 to 20 miles through the desert to find safety.
The public response was just unprecedented. Her return to L.A. was a mass event, drawing somewhere between 30 and 50,000 people. That's more than showed up for President Woodrow Wilson's visit 7 years earlier.
Yeah.
The sheer celebrity was blinding.
But the prosecutors in Los Angeles, they immediately smelled a rat. They started pursuing these competing theories. Either she staged the whole thing for publicity, which is, hard to believe given the risk, or she'd run off with a former employee, a man named Kenneth Ormiston.
And this is where you have to inject the socio-political context. Why did a kidnapping story draw such intense, politically charged scrutiny? You have to remember, the sources point out this was the era of Prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
Kidnappings for ransom were at a crescendo, and Prohibition had empowered organized crime to a massive degree.
This connects the story to the real underground power structures of Los Angeles. ASM was a moral crusader. She had the visibility, the public clout to stir up huge demand for greater enforcement of prohibition and other moral laws.
Exactly. Her influence was a direct threat to illegal operations,
Yeah.
especially those run by guys like Tony Cornero. He operated floating casinos off the coast. He had a history of arrests for bootlegging, even attempted murder. If ASM rallies public support for moral reform, it hits Cornero's bottom line. It threatens his whole operation.
So the idea that she was genuinely targeted by organized crime, not for ransom, but to eliminate a political threat, that's a very real possibility in this context.
A very real one. But instead of focusing on the organized crime angle, the public scrutiny of the media, they seized on what you could call forensic skepticism. And it was brutal.
It was. So initial medical reports did confirm marks of torture and bruises, but the media coverage just fixated on these superficial details. Critics were noting that her clothes didn't have the expected sweat stains, or that her shoes weren't scuffed enough after a 20-mile desert trek.
Which, as the sources point out, just shows a total disconnect between public expectation and reality.
Of course.
I mean, in the dry desert heat, sweat evaporates almost instantly. Your clothes might not be that stained, and if you're in good physical shape, which she was from her constant touring, you actually perspire less to begin with.
They were looking for the symptoms of a weak, sedentary woman, which she just wasn't. In the end, she got full legal vindication. She was never charged with faking anything. And yet, that storm of controversy just permanently marred her reputation and complicated her legacy.
And if you connect all this to the bigger picture, Aimee Semple McPherson's style, her use of media, her ecumenical contributions, they really influenced the entire trajectory of 20th century charismatic Christianity. But her deep alignment with fundamentalists, the ones seeking to eradicate secularism, it established a lasting pattern within American evangelicalism.
That's the enduring and I think fascinating connection here. She helped cement the idea of fighting a cultural war. The sources connect her fundamentalist side directly to a pattern we see in modern evangelicalism, the apocalyptic lens. This way of seeing reality as a constant xenophobic battle against the devil.
And this framework sustains the practice of demonization. So where Sister Aimee targeted modernism, Hollywood, the secular tide of the 20s today, that apocalyptic lens is often turned on groups like gays and lesbians, viewing them as an existential threat to America's families and religious foundations.
It's like her fear of the Antichrist?
Exactly. It's a shifting target. But that framework of fear, of constant combat, it stays remarkably consistent. It's about sustaining an identity through opposition.
Although it's worth noting the sources do point to a counter trend. There's a rising group of mostly younger evangelical activists who are getting really disillusioned by this whole politics of fear.
Yeah, they're starting to abandon that cultural fixation on demonizing specific groups.
So what does this all mean then? Aimee Semple McPherson's core achievement was successfully taking this deeply traditional, non-negotiable religious message and packaging it with the most radical, cutting-edge media tools she could find. She secured a permanent, though, complex and controversial place in American cultural history.
And her ministry, for all its success, was defined by this incredible tension. She demanded a powerful, almost religious adherence to certain cultural pieties, moral norms, traditional families, even as her own personal life, and especially her highly visible role as a charismatic female leader completely challenged the conventional social behaviors and gender roles of her time.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider, based on everything we've unpacked about Sister Aimee. How do you differentiate between the sacred mission and the secular messenger when you're evaluating charismatic leaders or movements today? Where do you personally draw the line between effective communication and, well, inappropriate showmanship?